Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turn renewable energy engineers talk science, veterans health, geopolitics, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest, and today I'm joined as always by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How's it going today, Richard?
Good to talk to you, Pearson.
Good to talk to you as well. So this is episode 25. Wow. We've gone through 25 of these babies. Today, I think we're going open-ended. This won't be a continuation of the globalization series necessarily. It's going to be a little bit more freeform. But before we get to the main topic of the day, which there isn't one, we're going to go through that good news story. So in the world of doom and gloom news, we like to brighten up the beginning of this episode with something that is kind of good news. So what do you got for us today, Richard?
All right, I'm going to not read the entire article for you, but I'm going to pick out a few little distinct pieces of this article about massive biomolecular shifts occur in our 40s and 60s, Stanford medicine researchers find.
Yes.
So, as a man of a certain age, which I have become gradually over time, as we all do, I've noticed things about me that have changed and that have, they kind of fit the thing of, why didn't another guy tell me that this was going to happen? Why are we keeping this a secret?
It wasn't gravity related. I feel like that's pretty out in the open these days, all the gravity related issues that us men and definitely I suffer from already. So gravity has taken hold of certain areas on my body faster than others.
Yeah. We see the gray hair, we see the wrinkles, we see the spots that are, attributed to sun exposure. We see all these things that go on with our aging. But the things that we don't really get is how, when we, it's self-evident, we all get it that when we get into puberty, when we are adolescents, that's a major biomolecular change in our bodies. And that attributes to the advancement and maturation of our reproductive organs and so forth. Yeah. And along comes this deep mellifluous male voice and all these other secondary characteristics.
Sure.
I don't think I have a mellifluous voice at all. I feel like I'm squeaking all the time.
On the spectrum, I think you don't have to worry about the squeakiness necessarily, and nor do I anymore, thankfully.
A regime of cigars and whiskey has really refined it, hasn't it?
Yeah, the whiskey and especially the weed the last 8 years, I would say, has easily been able to take care of any of that.
Really etches the vocal cords. Anyway, so there's all these secondary characteristics that are a consequence of a shift in our biology going from childhood to adolescence. And we don't really see another change as profound as that until our bodies hit their fifth decade or our 40s. And so I'm going to start the article here, then we're going to bounce around a little bit. If it's ever felt like everything in your body is breaking down at once, that might not be your imagination. A new Stanford medicine study shows that many of our molecules and microorganisms dramatically rise or fall in number during our 40s and 60s. Researchers assess many thousands of different molecules in people from age 25 to 75, as well as their microbiomes, the bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live inside us or on our skin, and found that the abundance of most molecules and microbes do not shift in gradual chronological fashion. Rather, we undergo two periods of rapid change. So, averaging around age 44 and age 60. A paper describing these findings will be published in the Journal of Nature, Aging, on August 14th. So this is a couple of weeks old.
Okay.
All right. So what they're introducing is this idea that we actually are a microbiome. We think that we're this individual that's made up of just human DNA and that's it. Nope. We have a lot of friends.
Why do you think yogurt's so popular amongst, yogurt's so good for you? Your gut biome, I believe, is a pretty common term. At this point, people have to know that a biome indicates there's an entire life ecosystem happening within your gut. That, God, I don't know if the education system is failing us or not, or if it just seems like these are pretty obvious. If anyone has experienced, we've talked about cancer on this show and cancer
Yep.
treatments a couple
Yep.
times here. And most people have had someone in their life who has had cancer, or they've had cancer themselves and have undergone some form of chemotherapy, which is
Mhm.
poisoning your body and has the side effect of killing a lot of this healthy biome within your body that helps fight
Yeah.
disease or process food or does any number of other things. So those are my first thoughts about this. Is like people can't be
Mhm.
completely agnostic from this knowledge, but yeah. So tell me more. Let's find out about.
I think if you interrogated man on the street style, people's understandings of how our pelvic tract works, or pelvic health questions, you'd be uh, unpleasantly surprised, I'm afraid.
If we
So
Jimmy Kimmel style, just went up to random people on the boardwalk or something and was like, "Hey, yeah,
yeah, there's a preponderance of misinformation and no information whatsoever that has found its way into our culture, and then is passed along rumor style, urban legend style, so
yeah."
that now we have people with unbelievably simplistic and backward ideas about the human pelvic reproductive tract. So,
What is I'm curious about this. I talked to a lot of people
mhm.
um, recently who like to overconflate their own personal experience and project that onto the world that of their understanding. And what is this? Has this always been around? Has this been around since Aristotle? Like, is this just the way a good portion of people go around thinking about their life? Like, did they go, well, I met this person who said this one thing this one time. So, based on this one experience, despite statistical evidence contrary to it, and despite all these scientists talking about it, that one person in my personal experience that I met and we visually like that holds way more weight than
Mhm.
anything that you could tell me or show me on in the world. What do you think that comes from, or
Uh,
what's
uh,
up with that, Rich?
at the risk of overstating, and now we're going to pantomime what you just asked me about. So, at the risk of pointing at detailed studies that I don't have at hand,
Sure.
right? There are sociological experiments that have been performed to kind of get us an idea about this, and those are studies around human biases. So we have biases about um, things that have occurred recently. I think this is the Bader-Meinhof thing. So
Mm-hmm.
we start noticing things, and then we realize, oh, we just were never noticing it before, but now it seems like it's all around all the time.
Sure.
And that's the everywhere throughout the streets in the town I live in, and so it's probably true throughout the entire state. I haven't really investigated everywhere that there's a fire hydrant. There's a little reflective patch on the street next to it.
Mm-hmm.
Never noticed it in my entire life. I'm 47 years old. And now it's like, oh, there's that little reflective blue thing on the, little thing winking at me. And it's things like that that sort of show up. So biases and
So
like a recency bias.
recency bias.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Okay.
we have these other things that um, that are they're not the same thing, but I'll mention both of them, and then we can see how they divide away. And one of them is the overconfidence in our abilities. So the
Yeah.
Dunning-Kruger experiments. And so a person with low experience might have a high expectation of their abilities with whatever the task is they're doing. And a person with a lot of experience might have a low understanding of their competence in that task. That's Dunning-Kruger. And then the the last one here, what was I going to say? It was going to be, boy, were we talking about aging or what? It's confirmation. It's another one of the biases, but it's essentially when we encounter someone who says something that reaffirms something that we believe already. So this is the kind of thing where let's say we have a not religious,
A religious awakening. Let's say we have a religious awakening. And in this no, okay, we were going down.
That was a Freudian slip, I believe. A political perspective.
Sure.
Let's say we have a political perspective, and when we listen to people who agree with that political alignment, we will be more likely to believe what they're saying. And this is something that I think you and I are going to discuss later as well. But
yeah,
when you listen to someone who is the opposite of that political alignment, what they're saying, you're going to scrutinize more. You're going to interrogate more on the basis of their alignment being not the same as yours. So when you're hanging out with a bunch of your friends, there's a hierarchy in those friend groups. It's really hard for us as a species to totally get rid of hierarchies, because even if it's a pretty flat org chart, for example, in your friend group, there's still someone who's going to be the tiebreaker in a lot of things, and their voice is going to rise above.
Yeah.
And so what can happen is, there's a scenario I could describe, but I try to keep it a little more general, which is in that friend group, let's say someone has a little more status or is the oldest of the friend group, or
sure,
for whatever reason,
is in some position of authority, the group has given them some type of social or intellectual or authority to weigh in, and their voice has more weight, or their opinion might have more weight than other people within the friends group based on the context of the situation or their profession or something like that. Yeah.
They became a manager at a local restaurant at age 24, and as a consequence of setting everyone's schedules, they feel pretty endowed with some realities about the world, and so when they speak, at least in the friend group that's they're in their orbit, they might have a little more authority on the topics, even if they're not an expert on the topic at all. Back to Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah.
So when we are mutually horrified over this grand distance that we're talking to each other about the state of the public's average understanding of human health and human biology, I mean, there's any number of constant attacks on our education system that would tend to refine the subject matter and time spent on subject matters down to what is most readily testable in a reading, writing, and arithmetic sort of format.
Sure.
So there's those tendencies. There is a it's a minority, but it's a pretty vocal minority of people who believe that our education system is so broken that the families believe that they absolutely could teach their children better at home. So, that's subject to a lot of discretion on what topics that parents want to cover.
Sure.
So that might not include human health very much, or it might have a very vague overview, or it might be totally wrong. Who knows? Yeah. So the human health discussion is one of those things where we might have had a high point sometime in the late 80s, early 1990s. And I think that high point has been gradually in decline ever since then.
Yeah. Something along the line of a distrust within our institutions of growing over the last 10, 15 years. That definitely it. I was curious. I talk to people often, and I'll say, oh, well, based on the statistics of this is, it looks like this is the trend that we're noticing. And they'll come back and be like, well, all of the people I've talked to, and I lived in this place, they don't think that at all. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I don't know those people, but it looks like they would be the minority then of the opinion based on the statistics, and then they go, and then they'll still be like, well, no, based on my own experience. And I'm like, cool, but this is, I can't do anything with that evidence. I know people who think this, so that we could do that game, but it's really curious when you have these debates with people and they're like, well, I'm going to take this evidence around my small little sphere of influence. And I always think we have 350 million people now, or 330, whatever, well over 300 million people on this in just this country alone. and each state, it might as well be a different country in its own right in a lot of ways,
Right.
as you know, being north of me right now in Oregon and California, although we do have some similarities, very different states. I can
Yeah.
say, having lived in all three of the West Coast states, they're all very different from each other,
Right.
ideologically, even the weather and ecosystems within these three states, even though those lines are just lines on maps that separate us.
Geography is determinate, it turns out.
Yeah. So that is all to say, like, the idea of thinking that your small sphere of influence within whatever city or town you live in, within a state and so on, would be enough of an experience to kind of to project that onto the entire U.S. living condition, or even
Yeah.
the world, is just seems incredibly egotistic or narcissistic. I don't know what the term would be, but or just blatantly naive, like willfully ignorant. It's a weird way to think. I I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, there was also a brief period of time in the mid to late 20th century where we kind of had a we had probably the most uh access to and the most kind of like distilled down national mass media. And that national mass media was in the form of magazines and newspapers and broadcasting stations that carried national news programs and so forth. And this is not Richard doing it. There, the good old days of 3 channels and PBS. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
doing that. But what I'm saying is that um, the information that people received during that glorious 70 years that I'm describing,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of meant that homogenized understanding of some things across the country. And one of the this is, we're in the tall weeds here, and hopefully we'll find a way back out of these tall weeds. But there was a radio program started in the 1980s, and I think it lasted until 2016, called Loveline.
I
And
remember Love
and
Line.
it was broadcast out of LA, and it had a couple different, like, the host changed every 10 years or so. And it performed a service in America that I think is probably being made up now by people on YouTube and people on TikTok.
Sure.
Because there's a few of these social media outlets where people are actually talking about pelvic health and options for women, and there's some podcasts that are adjacent to those other social media enterprises.
Sure.
And so it's not a national media thing the way that Loveline was a syndicated radio program when it was broadcast. I mean, there were multiple stations on the West Coast that received their signal
Yeah.
and put out locally, but it was also broadcast on the East Coast and throughout the Midwest as well. The first time I heard the program, I was in Fort Riley, Kansas. And so I was listening on some radio station that came out of what's that called? No, I don't. Now I don't remember the name of the cities in Kansas anymore, but it was about 55 miles away.
I won't be able to help you.
Lawrence, Kansas. It was broadcast out of Lawrence.
Okay.
And so with the topics that they covered actually were too, for some people's sensibilities, they were too progressive,
Risque.
because they would talk about human sexual behavior, and they would talk about transgender issues, and they would talk about back in the early 2000s,
most likely. Yeah, I mean,
totally. Yeah, back in the early 2000s, we still hadn't left our 20th century gay panic, and so there was, like, every time they would bring a gay person on, it was like, oh, this is really wild information to the so-called straight public that they were broadcasting to.
sure.
So there was occasionally they would, on the program, they would talk about being shut down in some markets, and it was because there were their classic this is an antiquated terminology, but the blue hairs. The kids are calling them Karens now, but we used to call them blue hairs.
Yeah.
But they would complain to the radio station. And so
The Bible Belt, yeah, for sure. You get the
Yeah.
deep evangelicals or the Baptists. They start. They don't want to hear that devil radio on channel or whatever. Yeah,
when I didn't live in Oklahoma any longer than basic
you
training
had
in
to.
AIT. Yeah. Right. So I was there for what, 4 months, whatever it was.
Yeah, Fort
And
Sill.
then
Wait,
Fort Sill was where I took one station unit training for basic and AIT.
Got it.
So that's
All
where
right.
that's a field artillery school is there.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
right.
my first duty station was in Kansas.
Okay.
And as a West Coast person, to me, there's one state called the Midwest, and there's no distinction between any of them. But it turns out, what do they call that? The narcissism of small differences.
Yeah.
So, Oklahoma has a very different concept of their conservative approach to their civilization than even Kansas does. And ironically, or in kind of a unexpected way, Kansas is a progressive state by comparison.
Yeah.
Now, if you compare Kansas to a coastal state, they're not progressive at all in that comparison. But living in Kansas, there was certainly a culture around the charismatic Christian faith and so forth, which I began to get a lot of contact with. But no one was canceling Loveline during the 1990s when I lived in the state. Anyway, so that's a super long answer to your question, which is, why are Americans so confused about biology? Well, we're probably not really getting it anymore in public school. And depending on the private school that you go to, it might be such that they don't prioritize public health and human biology because it doesn't fit their cosmology. And without a mainstream homogenizing kind of national broadcast, we're probably not getting it that way either.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure at this point our education system will have to go through a reform sometime soon if it's not already. We could only hope. It's interesting getting back to the aging thing that 60 is the next benchmark age.
Yeah.
Is it 60 exactly, or they're just saying the 60s? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they're saying 44 and 60. Like all of their data points on this population of people that they surveyed clustered the most around those two ages.
So it was funny. I was talking to my mother-in-law. She's, I think, 63 now or 64. Oh no, she's 65 now. But she was just saying that 2 years ago, the next year, like when she turned 63, she felt like everything got worse all at once. She was talking about how she just suddenly felt older. Her bodies, the joints, everything through and through. And she started getting sick more often too. Although, to be fair, we moved down 2 years ago with two new disease buckets that we bring over every week to infect them with brand new diseases. So
I believe the terminology is called vector. They're fomites.
Yeah. So I bring these little fomites by weekly to infect them. So there's two different things that are affecting this study. If there was a study happening anyways, she made mention of the rapid feeling of like the next year, suddenly just everything clicking and just feeling older. And we had this conversation this last year. It was really, so there's my, what is it? What is it when it's just my evidence, my anecdotal evidence? There we go.
Your anecdotal evidence. Well, the thing that you're noticing is interesting in the human life cycle context. So the human life cycle is one where we have an upper end to our age. So our species can really only live until our early century.
Yeah.
That's we don't.
My grandma's 97. Last week, she turned 97. She's cogent. She's politically aware. We talk politics. She's not she forgets things now, but she'll complain to me about it. She's like, dang it, my memory. She talks to me. She's all like, the brain's just not working like that. But she'll mention her memory a lot. She's like, I miss my memory. She's like, there's times, because she's like, I know the thing that you're talking about, but I can't think of the word, the place, pulling on the name and stuff. So
I'm already doing that myself, so that's what I have to look forward to.
Yeah, me too. So, I was like, shit.
So occasionally you'll read a news story about, the newest, oldest person on Earth, in the country, not on Earth, but in the country. And, I think that maybe they're on the leading edge of 120 years old. So, occasionally it can get that far, but that's
I hear 119, 121. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those
that's
ages.
The extreme upper end of our life cycle. So our life cycle is probably more closely contained to something that's about 60 years. So it'd be wild that there would be a 50% increase on some of us compared to that 60-year, average. And because of some interesting technological and medical factors, the age for men and women is different. Women live longer than men do in the civilization, and it's in the 80s. Yeah. So we technology has extended our lives by maybe as much as 20 years. All right.
Yeah, the average for sure.
Yeah,
we're totally in the 80s now. Yeah, like it's 81 or something is the average American lifespan. I think it did go down a little bit during the COVID period, but it was the COVID period.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally I think it's roughly 80, 81 or something like that. And so that's quite the increase over a century, roughly. I would say that happened over the last century, it sounds like.
So with that bracket, if we just take 80 as kind of an average upper limit to our age, then our typical point of reproductive maturity is going to be somewhere in that second decade that we're living in. So between the ages of 12 and 20, that's kind of where we average end up mature enough to reproduce. And that means that if things are, physically, right? I don't think anyone's qualified at that age, but they're physically ready.
I'm just saying physically, but mentally, I don't even know if the 20-year-olds are ready to be technically reproducing, but I'm just going to throw that out there.
My niece turned 20 this year, I think, and her dad is 40. So nicely done. Anyway, so you're kind of beginning to pick up where I'm going with this, which is there are these 20-year increments where we are maturing ourselves, starting families. The little kids in those families are maturing themselves. There's another 20-year increment. Now we're in our 40s. Now they're going to, in theory, leave home and go do the exact same human life cycle thing. They're going to go replicate that. And then, maybe within the next 2 to 15 years, they're going to come back with their own reproductlings. Yeah. And so, not that this article is talking about that specifically, but the human life cycle has these 20-year increments that are interesting in how they, there's going to be a cluster of data around, okay, well, age 20 might be in human history, that might be kind of an old age for people to start families, but in our civilization, 20 is kind of on the young age
side.
At this point.
No, at this point, I would say even we'd see at the turn, from 1950s till now. I mean, like looking at what the age at which our parents had kids versus us millennials. I know a lot of people are saying millennials aren't having kids. This has been the complaint. And I've been saying, no, they just had their kids in the 30s, not their 20s. Like that was the biggest difference of what happened here, right? So the core block of the millennials are now well into their 30s. I'm 39. I have 2 kids. My millennial group on Instagram all seem to be reproducing right now. A couple of my friends just had their second child. Who knows if they'll go for 3, but they've essentially replaced themselves now. I don't know if they're doing the 2.1, but we'll see. Once again, I'm bringing up anecdotal evidence. But it seems to me that, that because technology has advanced our age, there might be something to the fact that we're realizing that, first off, calling women geriatric pregnancies in their 30s might have been a bad idea, right? And like
Yeah.
seems like very antiquated language. And
Hmm.
there are women having kids into their 40s now, and 44,
Right.
45. Those are a little bit riskier ages, but it's becoming not as uncommon as we thought originally. I mean, celebrities are definitely having kids that late. Um, some of them, to be fair, are using different, having somebody surrogate their child, or, using IVF maybe, or all these other different methods. But
Right.
there's something happening there. And I'm curious to see what the differences or the effects of 30-year-olds having and raising children versus 20-year-olds having and raising children. Like, there should be some measurements that they'll be able to start figuring out, and like what the differences are in the maturity rate. And because I'm very curious about this, but this idea that we've extended life, I think, might have changed these 20-year increments, or
Right.
not. I completely agree with your the cycles or the phases maybe, but
Hmm.
maybe it shifted those 10 years left or right, on the scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Totally. Well, let me read a little bit more of this article for our audience, because there's some more juicy things in here to kind of get through.
sure.
So the researchers found that thousands of molecules and microbes undergo shifts in their abundance, either increasing or decreasing, around 81% of all the molecules they studied. And when I'm talking about molecules, that's going to be in that paper in Nature. They're not going to get into that in this article. So
Sure.
that's going to be neurotransmitters. That's going to be, from taking blood samples. So you're going to see different chemistries in people's blood. That's the level of cholesterol, a number of platelets, and so forth and so on. Right. So there's all these different biological data points that are human material, human DNA, or human material. And then there's going to be the second subset of molecules and other life that are the non-human DNA that accompany us on our journey around
Yeah.
the sun.
I'm imagining they're measuring it before. They're measuring this every
Yeah.
year throughout a whole
Yeah.
study of people, and then
Yep.
at certain ages they started to
Yep.
notice trends where the difference in those that first order biomass molecules and those second order like biomass molecules, those severely shifted.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, there's probably a whole new cluster of other biome or other stuff that probably appears at those ages that, makes up the difference, but is more, feasting on our slowly decaying flesh, essentially, I imagine. I imagine my 80-year-old biome is going to be, it's going to be rife with life, but it might not be like helpful biomass anymore. It'll be biomass that's like eating away at me as I decay into dust.
Well, there's any number of things about this so there's so far in the article I haven't seen this, but there's disease states that we live with chronically.
Mm-hmm.
And those disease, so you want to gross yourself out sometime, read about the disease state called thrush, which is fungal disease state, right? It's gnarly. The descriptions are pretty gnarly, but we as a species we're just a few white blood cells away from being attacked pretty maliciously by fungi and yeasts that will colonize us. And yeah, they're like you're describing, they're kind of waiting to decompose us so that the next living thing can come along.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know from this article what the disease states of the people being tested are, but they probably have chronic diseases or chronic medical conditions that might affect these numbers.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue. So when they looked for clusters of molecules with the largest changes in amount, they found these transformations occurred the most in two time periods when people were in their mid-40s and when they were in their early 60s. Although much research has focused on how different molecules increase or decrease as we age, and how biological age may differ from chronological age, there's an interesting distinction. A very few have looked at the rate of biological aging. That so many dramatic changes happened in the early 60s is perhaps not surprising. So the large cluster of changes in the mid-40s was somewhat surprising to the scientists. At first, they assumed that menopause or perimenopause was driving large changes in the women. skewing the group. But when they broke out the study by sex, they found the shift was happening in men in their 40s too.
Why it wouldn't? It's such a weird
Yes.
thought to be like, well, it's got to be the women. It's like, because men aren't, experiencing the effects of age at all. It's just, anyway.
It has less of it carries less of a totality in effect on our ability to reproduce over the length of our lifespan. But it's not that much different from a total biological change that's happening to men at the same time it's happening to women. We are biologically aging, and the things that make up our body, both its human biology and its microbiology, are changing during this period of time. And this is a thing that I think is really important to get our minds around.
Well, men being able to reproduce later might be a function by the fact that throughout history, many populations of men or percentages of men never get a chance to reproduce. And this isn't just, across the human spectrum, but so be at least along the same chronological age lines that women have been able to reproduce, and women were dying very early through much of our history during reproduction cycle, and men lived longer so that maybe they could find a mate throughout their lifespan, not necessarily in line with the same chronological order. Now, there's a whole bag of cultural and social reasons for all of this happening as well. Cultural pressures and social pressures throughout history, and norms that now are pretty cringy, by modern standards, as far as humans breeding at certain ages, is specifically the exploitation of young brides and women, most notoriously through history. So I think of those things initially with that idea, but it is funny looking at biological age and chronological age. I do have a little story about that. So for my job, to get additional health benefits from your health insurance, or to maximize your health insurance, most large corporations go into partnerships with a program that allows you to keep your premium or your monthly health insurance bill flat the next year you renew it, instead of it going up some usually astronomical, atrocious rate. You have to basically jump through a bunch of health hoops to earn enough points so that you reach a certain status that allows you to keep your status premiums. You have to be a platinum member or whatever. And when I first signed up for this a couple of years ago with my company, I was aged in. My biological age was 41, and I just turned 38 taking the job. But we'll just say I was 37 because I'm 39 now, and it's been 2 years. So basically, I'm 37, but it put me at biological age 41. And then last year when I did so last year I had some work to do. When I hit 38, then I was down to age 39. So my biological age dropped 2 points. And then this year, now that I'm 39 chronologically, my biological age is 37. So that is the difference that I was able to get through 2 years of managing my health through this program, essentially. So anyways, there's once again, I'm just full of complete anecdotal evidence to add to your aging story.
Well, changes that may influence health and disease risk, apropos of exactly what you've said. In people in their 40s, significant changes were seen in the number of molecules related to caffeine and lipid metabolism, cardiovascular disease, and skin and muscle. In those in their 60s, changes were related to carbohydrate and caffeine metabolism, immune regulation, kidney function, cardiovascular disease, and skin and muscle. So there's some similarities there, kind of at the tail end of those two sentences. But by the time people are in their 60s, whatever their relationship with alcohol was, it probably is gone at that point. But people in their 40s, they still have a relationship with alcohol. They still have a relationship with caffeine.
Yeah, me too. I wonder. I was asked. Go ahead.
This other phrase called lipid metabolism is actually a really interesting thing to keep in mind, because lipid metabolism is not unrelated to stress. So
Mm-hmm.
homeostasis and lipid metabolism tend to be related things. Interesting. And lipid metabolism and other disease markers like heart disease and um, uh, diseases that affect the circulatory system are interesting with regard to lipid metabolism. So
Okay.
lipids are fats. Go
Yeah.
ahead, please.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask you. There. I wonder if they put anything. I mean, and we would have to look into the study, or it might be something to follow up on. But I was curious because you went through cancer recovery and treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if people who go through that, because I remember my mom when she was going through chemo, I think she hit her menopause, like got triggered from the chemo,
Yeah.
before probably before it was going to trigger earlier, and she aged through that 60-year spot at like 50 something.
Yeah.
But then she felt like when she was living through her 60s, she was like, oh, no change happened, where she didn't feel that like sudden over the 60s cliff. But I think she had experienced it previously through the cancer treatment potentially.
Yeah.
And I was wondering
Yeah.
if maybe you went through that since it was in your late 30s, early 40s, or
I was 42 when I was diagnosed.
42. So like just right there on the cusp, if that just basically like sent you right into that next evolution. I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
Well, this gets back to the idea of the biological aging. This gets back to those interrelating features that, again, I'm not a medical professional, so when I talk
Sure.
about the relationship between stress and homeostasis and
Lipid
what's the word I
metabolism.
want? That and how our cells handle, when our cells are handling a inrush of stress hormones, how that changes their approach to fats and sugars and so forth in our blood. So there's a lot to be said about people being in their 40s and having either chronic health problems or health crises that are essentially just it's the pileup of things that have been going on since we started our professional and adult lives, maybe 20 years, maybe even 25 years earlier, which type of American family you grew up in, like, might have sent you out, like, you're 17, get out of our house. What are you doing here? Get out.
Absolutely.
So,
these could just be carried on trends that ways of living that you've carried on. And then it's gotten to a critical point where now you suddenly have to like, oh, hey, it turns out you need to change your relationship with caffeine or alcohol or sugars or fats or absolutely. And it makes sense in your 60s that like suddenly your kidneys are like, hey, we've been doing a lot of work and you didn't treat our liver very well. So he's already, he wants to tap out and he's doing half the work for us. Right. So, I mean, all this could be happening.
Yeah. And these organs all are affected by, I keep calling it homeostasis. What's the word I'm looking for? It's I've brought it up on this program before, and here I am having one of my moments where I can't remember the name of the thing. Allopathic
load. Yes.
Yeah. Allostasis and allopathic load. That's the terminology I actually wanted. So yeah, the allopathic load on people in their 40s is probably pretty cumulative for the preceding 20 or 25 years, and the burden, the health burden on people in their 60s, we can imagine is different. And it's not necessarily that they had less stress or that they had a more relaxed 20 years from 40 to 60.
Sure.
But there's a number of things that change in that 20-year period that probably are at the same time this cumulative health burden from work and stress and family and stress and stress and stress.
Stress and stress.
To a tendency in that last decade or so of your professional life where you've attained a certain level of, like, you're probably in the C-suite in some cases. You might be a senior manager.
You own your own company. You're director of some type, at least, a
Totally.
VP, depending on the size of your organization. If you're a baby boomer right now, you're most likely a director or VP at the company I work at. It would be very weird to see, and I haven't really seen anyone of that age in any position that seems very, a low level position. for
Yeah,
lack of
you're
a
no
better
longer
term.
digging ditches anymore. In many cases, you're no longer driving the forklift, and you're no longer doing things in a that that are not necessarily physically demanding, but you're probably not doing the things anymore that require a lot of striving.
Yeah,
There's a level of uh, you've arrived that happens in that last decade and a half.
sure.
So, there's going to be that affect the allostatic load that people have in that last decade or so.
And reminder, that's a good throwback allopathic load. We could look at that as like your overall trauma load that you've carried with you, right? At the end of the day. And for our listeners who have come by our videos in the last 10 episodes, you might not have known this, but we did start off pretty heavy into veteran issues and mental health
Yeah.
specifically. And we do talk at length about allopathic load and other different parts of the brain and how it relates to traumatic stress and those physiological effects that come from those. We spoke on that. I believe it would be episode 7 on the way down. Warning to listeners as well: it's terrible audio quality, terrible, even worse video quality. Because it was our first start, and they're kind of a mess. But there is some good stuff in there. So be cautious, and I apologize in advance for your ears and definitely your eyeballs.
These are things that we'll always address in our conversations. It's just that we focused on them heavily in those earlier. So, as time goes on, like this article, like, for example, is just one where we've revisited some of that material.
Yeah.
I use the term allopathic load and allopathic stasis interchangeably with the term stress, and there's this really interesting history where the term stress comes from. And one of the things that we get into in those earlier programs is literally the breakdown of the diagnosis post traumatic stress disorder.
Yes.
And so we talk about what that means as a chronic burden to our biology, mental health, and our biology, and how the two are completely interrelated, and how they have these determining effects on our health outcomes going forward. And a study like this, this study doesn't even talk about whether or not the people that are being interviewed and tested, what type of family system do they come from?
Yeah.
Are they veteran, or right? What is their life experience prior to those tests?
Yeah, they're looking at just the physiological effects and the differences of their biology, their biomass before and after at these certain sections, which once again, all the psychologists would probably be like, hey, we're forgetting the whole area that the doctors also still aren't addressing when we're talking about physical ailments and diagnosis. And being that we're veterans, the reason we focus so heavily on this is that if you were an enlisted veteran of the services, there was probably a good chance that you had run-ins with some of the mental health issues or the trauma or the allopathic load issues. These would be ringing a bell for those individuals or those people who listen. And if they don't, good job to your family for not being totally terrible. So
you're might be an unusual example of an American who chose a military career, because I think the rest of us wind up there because of the things that preceded it in our development.
Enlisted. If you were an officer, you might have had decent parents if you joined. I mean, there are different things, different scenario. But anyways, we've covered that before.
All right, so that's kind of the. I'm gonna leave this article where it, I read a couple of paragraphs from it, so we have some ideas about what it's about, and essentially. I started noticing not only the difference post treatment that I was experiencing biologically, and like my energy level these days is just tanked.
Yeah.
I would leave work and go home and then work another 6 hours and then get up the next day at 7 and go to work again. And that's impossible for me now. It's totally changed, and it's changed to the point where I'm actually going to be getting a checkup next week to talk to my family doctor about what is going on? Is this normal for my age? Is it normal for someone with my health history? What is really happening here?
Yeah. Well, and so one of the things for that, and I noticed declines in my energy a couple of years ago, but that was due to the chicken and egg scenario of not doing physical activity. And
Yeah.
for me, the biggest adjustment I made was doing daily walks. That was like probably the biggest thing, the daily walks, and then going to the gym like at least every other day, something like that. And I've been most consistent this year about it. I started doing this about 3 years ago, where I like at least I was walking every day, and then I started working out every other day. Not consistently to begin with, but it became more and more consistent,
Right.
to the point where now it's it's basically it's built into our schedule in any form and fashion. And I did notice, like, I'm almost positive your doctor is going to say something about, are you getting daily exercise, or are you getting movement in early?
Yeah.
Because it is the capacity thing. You do more workout and it actually gives you more energy capacity. And it's that whole thing. And so I did make that change for my upcoming 40s. And also the kiddos did require me to have more energy. Plus, when I was at school, it lent itself to sitting for 13 hours a day and studying after class. There was so much sitting involved, just naturally built into getting to the degree process.
Yeah.
That my energy levels were just, I was exhausted, and I hadn't done any physical activity every day for, years at that point. So,
Well, these are issues that are relevant to some segment of our audience, and I hope that they have the wherewithal to follow up on these things and check on them themselves, because it's what do they say about entropy? It's the garbage pile of the universe, and so entropic forces are acting on our bodies and minds, and so do the most to try to prevent that or forestall it.
Yeah, I mean, one of my fundamental core principles about the human experience is one of our goals is to progress over time is countering entropy. Like if you're the human species or any alien out there who's trying to build towards something and create more and more complex structures and systems and molecules and chemistry and physics, which we're doing all of those things. We would like to create more complex materials and use those materials to create new energy types and all kinds of stuff. The human condition is that. Entropy we would like to descend into madness and chaos and our molecules spread out. So it's on us to keep the entropy tight as long as we can in our own body before we eventually decay into dust. So I like to laugh about death, but that's just, it's one of those things. I'm I get a dark sense of humor when it comes to the doom and gloom of it all.
Wait until you have regular interactions with nurses in oncology clinics. You've not seen dark yet.
God. Yeah.
Yikes.
Well, I'm just waiting for that inevitable prostate cancer. That's pretty much a statistical certainty in the male experience these days. It's not. It's like a motorcycle at this point. It's not a matter if you're going to get into an accident. It's when you're going to. So yeah. If you're a male these days, you can pretty much. There's a 70 to 80% chance that you'll probably have prostate cancer within your lifetime if you live to a certain age. And so the good news is you got to live to that certain age. So I guess there's that. And the other good news is it's one of the most studied cancers out there because it's specific to the male condition.
Yeah, we get a lot of medical attention, it turns out. We're very popular with medical studies.
Yeah.
And our biology is better known than that of women. That's actually a really interesting problem in our civilization.
So weird. I wonder why that happened. It's so curious to me. I have no idea.
Boy, it's a sore spot for sure.
Yeah, that would be an entire other episode, and we've got about 6 minutes left of this one. So, well, we managed to talk through a whole, basically stick on a whole article for the episode, which that was fun. I thought it was interesting topics. Us aging and decaying. So,
yeah. Well,
so I mean, cut down on your drinking, cut down on your caffeine, and cut down on your tobacco. Those are the rules that have to probably hit as the best thing that ever happened to me was having the damn kids. Well, was meeting Sarah and then having the damn kids. First Sarah, second kids, third the dogs. I don't know. But anyways, since life forms have been added to my individual life, those added life forms have caused me to make significant adjustments to my life that have ultimately increased my decreased my biological age while I increase my chronological age. And I'd say that has been, and they will also offer the most stress too. You know, I can imagine my children will continue to stress me out as they do, or their safety will stress me out. Their what education they're getting will stress me out, and so on and so forth. And every sport they do will start to stress me out, and every friend decision they make will stress me out because they'll find that shitty friend. We all do. Or you could be the shitty friend. Maybe I was the shitty friend through certain periods of my life. You met the shitty friend, So yeah, there's plenty of stress to come, but they have added a sense of an obligation to be healthy. It gives you more excuses to be healthy, I would say sometimes. So I have noticed that in my life. But that doesn't mean just get married, because this could equally and easily be the opposite side of the spectrum.
One of the markers for men's longevity and healthy life, it turns out, is if we're married. Being married extends our life expectancy. It consequently shortens women's. Sorry,
yes.
ladies.
My
apologies.
Yes, sorry for that. No, for sure. I mean, they're stressing out trying to keep us alive so much from destroying ourselves. And yes, my wife, Sarah, she has definitely been the main advocate and proponent for my health. And I think usually that comes down to if your partner is keeping you alive longer, it's most likely a healthier relationship than not, because there are bad partnerships like anything else, of course. But most likely it means that the guy in this case, in this relationship, he's probably trusts and is heeding the words of his partner often. And I know that I do too, and not rejecting it out of like pride or whatever, might make you not listen to your partner. But yeah, it's been very helpful for me is having trust enough to be like, hey, she's critiquing the way I'm drinking, not because I'm making an ass of myself. I was doing that when she met me, and she didn't critique my drinking then. It's because she's seeing a trend of me, probably going to kill myself 20 years before she'd like to lose me, So
right. And that health, that positive health benefit to both partners, I would hope, but certainly in males, is that probably hearing about this more these days, but loneliness. In other words, just being not connected to people in those significant emotional ways that we really need to thrive.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it probably leads to a cognitive decline. It probably has interesting immune consequences to being alone or lonely. And so when we talk about marriage being a positive health marker in longevity for men, it's more than just them, their spouses intervening on our drinking.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a lot of factors there.
Oh my God. There's so many. One of the things that I've noticed most is my wife and I think very differently about a lot of different things. And if you start to get to know the way someone thinks about things, and you notice that they think better about certain things than you do, and I mean more correctly, like finances and other things that I was weak on in my, personally, she's far stronger in those areas. I mean, she's got a pre-law degree and an economics degree. So she's got she makes up for a lot of strong suits that I didn't have. Even with business conversations and like white collar work, like common, like ways of being, ways of talking, ways of addressing people, ways of going about your workday within the white collar space, she was far more familiar and way better at navigating that than someone who comes as a veteran who's very much cares about hierarchies and, that respect hierarchy that's there within, a specific military organizations, she had to break those tendencies in me because she's like, hey, this is not the way. You need to chill out. Like, this is not the way this is. And so that's all to say, one of the advantages I've had from knowing her is there's certain times when I think about a problem and I think about it, how I would solve it. And then I'm like, wait, this isn't my kind of problem I would solve. This is something that Sarah would solve. And I'll either think like she would about it. I was like, well, how would she think about this? That's different from mine. And why would she say my ideas were bad? Or I'll just consult her also, because she's right next door while I'm working all the time. So, but those are huge advantages, that I get to go through. It's like having an extra brain, of someone you trust to think about something from a different perspective. And it allows you to empathize with someone else's viewpoint as well too. So I think those are really helpful elements. And I believe I've talked about how a partner is also really good at filtering your dumbest ideas before they leave the house. And that there's something there too. That really helps a lot because I have tons of dumb ideas, and some of you guys might have heard some of them so far already, but there's a filter that's filtering a good portion of them from ever leaving my mouth or lips or brain after having discussions with her. So,
well, one thing when you said like having a second brain to help you process, it's a metaphor, and it is that. So one thing that I'd like for the audience to take away from conversations that get into this territory is that human nervous systems change other nervous systems. And so when we interact with each other, this goes back to your question early in our conversation today, which is, well, where do people get these crazy ideas and why are they influencing whoever? Well, this is why. Yeah. And it has a lot to do with, this gets into the structure of how our brains are, the ad hoc assembly of the human brain over time, and how we develop the forebrain, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's right up here in front, and how late in life that is fully developed, and then what its purpose is post-development. And part of what its main purpose is to both inwardly and outwardly regulate our nervous system, and outwardly to regulate other nervous systems. And thus, that is the essence of our social and communal approach as a species. It doesn't always work perfectly. Sometimes it gets damaged in some individuals, and it causes all social chaos.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that is happening to us early in life is that, in that aforementioned, well, we're probably mature enough to have, physically to reproduce in our teens. This part of the brain is not done developing until 25. So you might get solid 6-7 years where you might be trying to raise a family, but you're not operating with a fully mature human brain and prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about that co-processing you're doing with your spouse, it's literally what's happening. You're literally co-processing, and both of your nervous systems are interacting in a way that do change each other, and you're going to have those effects on those Rugrats of yours you keep bringing.
Yeah,
you will influence them with that part of your brain as well. Well, we really hit on some totally off topics today.
Yeah. We didn't talk about globalization for shit. So this will definitely not be part of the globalization series. This will just be a fun, good, I guess we'll just talk about aging. I think that'll be the name of the episode. Episode 25, aging.
Sometimes you do a bottle episode where it's just a separate thing from all the other stuff.
I like to keep people on their toes, keep them guessing.
This is a time to acknowledge the time in history when this is. We have recently seen a political debate in this country between two primary candidates from two different political parties that are at loggerheads, and we're watching as those parties morph and change because of the people that are that are these top candidates for our executive office. And so
the parties are changing as we speak.
They're going to be very different things at the end of this year and the beginning of next year. Yeah, for sure. So
Hallelujah.
we didn't really talk about that today, but that's a topic we could discuss later when we can give it a more evergreen approach, I think.
I think so too. All right. Well, I think this is a good place to call it. Richard, it was a pleasure talking to you, and can't wait for the next time.
It's always a pleasure, Pearson. Good to talk to you too.
All right. Take care.
All right.